2610-106 from 1 right, cleared for takeoff.
1 right, clear to go, United 255.
Cleared 4461, 1 right, left and white.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to Flightcast Live at PDK here in Atlanta, Georgia at Warbird Weekend 2017. With me, as always, is my co-host Mark Den.
You're welcome.
Mr. Skyhawk Heavy.
Yep.
And to my left is our producer, Mr. Stephen Wilson. What's up, Stephen?
Thank you for Wilson Sweets, by the way.
Yes, we've been staying at Stephen's house, and he's been faithful sitting here all day, making extra runs to the house when we forget things, and just all-around amazing human. So, thanks to Stephen. Mark, it's been
knowing he cusses us out after we go home.
Yeah.
He loves us while we're here, but we get cussed out when we go home.
His family has to come back from their little day away. It's been a good day, Mark. The sun is peeking back out here and there, and
yes,
we hear the birds flying outside.
The temperature has risen.
Temperature's risen. You can't tell, but it is humid in here.
It's humid. We're actually getting close to the. I was just inside looking at the thermostat, and it said hail.
Yep.
So we're getting there.
The little fire emoji.
Yep.
All right, well, I'm really excited. This is actually a surprise interview.
Yes.
We're in the Epps Aviation hangar right now, as people can see some jets and cars and things in the background. And Mr. Epps himself, we were supposed to interview him, but they've canceled a day here,
busy,
and
though.
He's too busy. He walked in here with a mission and with our guest that we have here right now. And
So Mr. Epps brought him in.
He brought him in, and he said, you need to meet him and talk to him.
Yeah, because I have absolutely no idea what's going on.
Mark doesn't even know what's happening.
I don't know
right
what's
now.
going on.
So let's introduce him. With us today is Captain Brian Settles, who has, I think, 30 years in the military and 30 years as a commercial aviation pilot and author. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. Slight correction on the statistics.
Please.
I did do 6 years active duty in the Air Force and 5 years in the reserves, and I was a commercial airline pilot for almost 30 years, working for 3 different airlines in my career. And part of that story of working for 3 different airlines is the basis of my second book, which is Shattered Dream, a single-parent airline pilot's story. But I stand here before you today resting on the shoulders of the Red Tails, the Tuskegee Airmen Red Tails. I'm a member of the Atlanta chapter of the Tuskegee Airmen, and were it not for the breakthroughs that they achieved in aviation and in our society and civil rights, many of the doors that were cracked open for us who came later might not have been as easy to get through.
Oh, absolutely.
But I tell audiences many times I was already a pilot before I realized I wanted to be one, which is not exactly which is not exactly the way you want to start your career. You see, my life started in a Nebraska orphanage. At 7 days of age, my white mother, who had gotten pregnant by her African-American boyfriend, deposited me in the Lincoln State Orphanage at 7 days old, and I spent 3 years there until I was adopted by my mother. That is the greatest blessing of my life, and taken back to Muncie, Indiana, where I grew up on the segregated streets of Muncie, a biracial child looking for a sense of worthiness and adequacy. And early on, my winning formula was basketball and football. I figured it would take attention off my complexion and my features if I was unstoppable on the basketball court, or if it took a half a dozen people to bring me down in football. Well, my hoop and gridiron dreams were shattered with back-to-back meter collateral tears my junior year in high school.
Oh.
And I ended up registering late for Ball State University in my hometown, which pleased my mother very much. But I tell audiences all the time that you are who your friends are. And I ran into the equipment manager in the hallway outside the registrar's office at Ball State. And he said, B, man, you're going to go to Ball State? He said, great. He said, you got to come and get on the drill team. And I said, drill team? He said, yeah, man, we're going to have a blast drinking beer and drill competition and chasing co-eds. And I thought I could relate to a couple of those activities.
I could be on the drill team.
Yes, absolutely. So I
right.
said, how do you get on the drill team? He said, well, you got to sign up for Air Force ROTC. And I said, ROTC, do you have to wear a uniform? He says, well, only once a week. I said, man, I don't know about this Air Force ROTC thing. So to be on the drill team, I joined Air Force ROTC. You know, boys will be boys.
Sure.
And being a jock at heart, you know, I like the gung-ho stuff. Give me 50 push-ups if you mess up that drill move, kind of a thing. But the unexpected development on the drill team is that 2/3 of the dudes wanted to be Air Force pilots. So all of a sudden now you got ex-jock Brian Settles hanging out with these guys that want to be Air Force pilots. And my buddy that talked me into ROTC said, B, when you get in the Air Force, man, if you're a pilot, you're on the first team. And if you're not a pilot, you're working for those that are on the first team. So my simple elitist mentality, jock mentality kicked in. I said, well, I've never sat on anybody's bench. So if flying airplanes is what's happening, looking good, I'll take that. And
so we need to tell Tyler he's on the B team.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just like that, I chose to fly airplanes, not for any intrinsic love of airplanes. That I had never built a model airplane, but you don't want to make your choices in life based on looking good. But I wanted to be a pilot.
Now you tell me.
But I wanted to be an Air Force pilot. And this neediness that I spoke of about coming out of the Nebraska orphanage, being abandoned, having all kinds of issues of adequacy, led me, when I left Air Force pilot training, to volunteer to fly for the most challenging assignment that there was out of pilot training, and that was to volunteer to fly the F-4 Phantom.
Oh, wow.
In Vietnam.
I told you.
And I volunteered to fly the F-4 Phantom, but I knew that I was like the crew members of the Pequod who went after Moby Dick. I knew that I was going after a monster that I had never seen before in my life, taking on that combat tour. And as if you appreciate Ken Burns' current documentary on Vietnam, a 10-part series, you know that the streets were rife with anti-war activity. The streets were on fire with civil war, civil rights activity, and two of the leaders of our nation were struck down with assassination while I was finishing up my pilot training to go to Vietnam. And so I had grave misgivings about shooting craps with my life for something that I didn't believe in. But I chose to honor my commitment to fly Uncle Sam's airplanes rather than dodge across the border and hide out, being paranoid the rest of my life that I was going to be discovered for having chickened out on my tour.
Yeah, well, we want to say thank you, as we have to the other veterans that we've talked to, for your service. And we would be remiss to not mention that. So thank you so much for the freedoms that we all enjoy because of you.
Well, I appreciate the acknowledgement, and I do hasten to say that I struggle with being thanked for my military service because it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy, and all of us who have survived combat are changed forever.
I'm sure.
Ground infantry more than our combat pilots, because they're the ones that face the heat, the leeches, the insects, the poisonous snakes, and watch their buddies beside them being blown up with mortars and ground fire on a daily basis. My hat always goes off to the ground infantry, and one of the consolations I had for being a combat pilot in Vietnam was those missions that I went on, that we were called in because our friendly troops were in contact with the enemy, and they depended on our strafing and bombing and napalm attacks to be able to liberate them to live another day. And I knew that there were other people over there fighting that war that had been drafted, felt it was unfair, and didn't want to die in somebody else's land. And that was one of my consolations for serving and surviving that 199 combat missions. In the year that I was in Vietnam, we had 3 F-4 squadrons at Da Nang and 44 crew members in each squadron. In my squadron alone, in the year that I was there, of the 44 that I was flying missions with, 23 at one point or another got shot down. 23 out of 44. 6 were recovered. 17 never came home. were either POWs or MIAs. For many years, I suffered with survivor's guilt, knowing that there were many F-4 pilots that were smarter than I was, better sticks than I was. So the burning question is, Lord, why did I come home and they not come home? But I've answered that question in my later years since my flying career is over. Coming out of a single-parent home, the mother that adopted me with her then husband, I was raised by a single-parent mother. My father left home when I was 8 years old, and I have been spending my years after flying mentoring to young males who are coming up with no father in the home.
Wow.
Giving back to them, because there were mentors that took me by the hand and put their arms around my shoulder, encouraging me to stay strong in school and to continue playing sports. So that's what my mission is now, is giving back to the young. I wrote, as I said, Smoke for Breakfast, a Vietnam combat pilot story to underline the agony of shooting craps with your life for something that you're not sure about, and how my orphanage experience and being adopted drove me to always seek to find something that was going to enable me to validate myself as whole and a worthy person. And I tell audiences all the time that we pay sometimes a high cost for our neediness to be looking good. And certainly as a 24-year-old combat pilot in Vietnam, wearing that G-suit and flying those combat missions, flying fingertip formation, 3-foot wingtip separation from the airplane next to me at 400 miles an hour, it doesn't get much more sporting and looking good than that. And so I'm thankful for being here today. And my book is available on my website, www.captainbriansettles.com, under other books on the homepage. The other amazing story that I have written is Shattered Dream, a single-parent airline pilot's story. I survived Vietnam. I was assigned to the KC-135 refueling tanker, flew that for 3 years, was accepted to join the Air Force Academy staff as a faculty member, but chose to go to work for Eastern Airlines instead. I often wonder what the video replay of my life, had I gone to the Air Force Academy as a faculty member, would have probably gotten a PhD out of it and got a career in the Air Force rather than only doing 11 years. But I went to work for Eastern Airlines, and it was a great, great airline to fly for.
What did you fly?
I flew the Boeing 727 and the A300 with Eastern. But during my career, I flew the MD-82, the MD-87, the DC-9, the Boeing 757, and I think that just about is all that I can think of right now. But
so my question is Airbus or Boeing? That's always the big debate.
Yeah, I had the brief experience on the A300. Most pilots who were flying the heavies preferred the 1011, the Lockheed 1011, to the Airbus 300. But the 757 was a dream to fly once you got a handle on the technology with all the autopilot operation that you were operating under. But I had 15 years with Eastern Airlines when the strike and subsequent bankruptcy occurred, and I was a single parent with 2 teenage sons when Eastern shut down. And as a lark, to survive until I got rehired as an airline pilot, I chose to drive a cab in Buckhead, which an engineering buddy of mine had told me that was the one place that I could make the amount of money that I needed to survive until I got rehired. Well, that 6-month lark in Buckhead turned into a 2.5-year nightmare. With 2 teenage sons living in Stone Mountain, one of them was a sophomore at Georgia State, his brother was 13 years old. I'm spending 300 miles a day on the streets of Atlanta, 6 days a week to make 1/3 of what I was making as an Eastern pilot.
Oh.
And I'm worried about dying on the streets of Atlanta, waiting until I get rehired as an airline pilot and hoping that my sons are alive when I get home. They both had guns pulled on them at least twice while I was out on the streets driving the cab. But this story, A Shattered Dream, is about my struggle on the streets of Atlanta as a cab driver and the life lessons I learned about people and myself. Because for many, many years coming out of New Jersey and having ridden cabs in New York a few times, every experience I ever had in a New York cab, I was convinced I was going to die before I got to my destination.
You just told yourself this?
Well, they drive so recklessly.
Oh.
They drive, obviously you've never been in a New York cab. So
I have not.
the thing is that I realized that when I finally was a cab driver that I had a lot of condescension and lack of respect for those who drove a cab, and suddenly I found myself being one. So I learned a lot about humility and what the real gifts and blessings in life are. So I drove that cab. I tell my stories about the struggle to get back reemployed in the airline industry, and finally got hired by Private Jet Expeditions, which was an MD-82 operation out of Atlanta. Flew with them for 3 years, made captain in 6 months on the MD-82, and they went out of business on April Fool's Day of '95, apropos date.
Yeah.
So many of my Eastern buddies who were at Private Jet ran across the street to ATA Airlines, American Trans Air, up in India, headquartered up in Indianapolis.
Mm-hmm.
So I flew the 727 for my first 2 years with ATA, and then I checked out on the 757 as co-pilot. They wanted me to have at least a year's experience in the right seat, and then I upgraded to captain with ATA and flew captain my last 5 years, which it was better than not making captain at all, you know, but just as the pay was starting to get good and I was at the top of my game pilot-wise, the age 60 rule got me and I was forced out because of the age 60 rule. So I retired in 2004, and as I said, coming out of a single-parent home and having 2 sons that survived my life in the cab, I wanted to devote the rest of my time to writing books and mentoring young people and motivating them on what they need to do to be able to have the life that God wants them to have. The reason that I'm here is partially because of Pat Epps, who's the owner of Epps Aviation. Pat has read both of my books and evidently admires me quite a bit. And he had nominated me to be an advisor to the Georgia World War I Centennial Commission.
Wow.
And the Georgia Centennial Commission is feverishly working on a project for Hartsfield-Jackson Airport to have a major display that acknowledges the contribution of Americans during World War I. And one of the big projects that they have undergoing right now is to honor a native son of Georgia, Eugene Bullard, who grew up in Columbus, Georgia, spent his early years in Columbus, Georgia. The blessing in Eugene Bullard's life was that his family, although they were living in Columbus, Georgia, his family hailed from Martinique, meaning that they spoke 2 languages in the home, English and French. And Eugene Bullard was fluent in French. And at 8 years of age had the traumatic experience of witnessing his father almost hung, lynched in Columbus, Georgia. And at 12 years of age, to escape the cruel South in those days, fled to New York, where he jumped on a freighter, and it was a stowaway, and made his way to Europe as a 12-year-old. Think about what we would have been able to do as 12-year-olds.
Yeah, no way.
To go overseas. He worked his way to Europe and finally got to France, where as a teenager, he was a horse jockey and a prize fighter, saving his money and just living off of his wits. And when World War I broke out, Eugene Bullard immediately signed up for the French Foreign Legion and fought for the French in World War I. In many battles, he distinguished himself, and in the Battle of Verdun, he was so critically wounded that he was no longer able to participate in combat operations. And a buddy of his, while he was recovering from his ground infantry wounds, said, maybe you can be a flyer for the French. And on a whim, he submitted his paperwork and tried out as a French pilot and was accepted in the Lafayette Flying Corps, where he began to distinguish himself as a French fighter pilot in World War I. And getting involved in espionage activities, he had to return to the United States after his flying commitment was finished, and Charles de Gaulle found him operating an elevator in a high-rise building in New York, and took him back to France, where he received the Croix de Guerre, the highest military
Croix de Guerre.
Croix de Guerre. Thank you very much. Senior citizen, you can't trust him for a minute. But he got the highest award that he could have gotten as a pilot for the French. Came back to the United States and lived in obscurity. And when the United States entered World War I, they invited the American pilots that were flying for the French in the Lafayette Escadrille, invited all the American pilots back to the United States, accepted all of them to fly for the U.S. Air Corps, but they rejected Eugene Bullard, who had distinguished himself higher than all of these people that were in the Flying Corps.
Because of his skin.
Because of the color of his skin. While Bill Clinton was in office, he prevailed upon the United States Air Force to confer a second lieutenant's commission on Eugene Bullard 33 years after Bullard's death, and 77 years to the day that he had been denied acceptance in the U.S. Flying Corps. So to honor the incredible life that Eugene Bullard lived, and as kind of a reparation for his suffering, the Georgia World War I Centennial Commission has elected to resurrect a statue honoring Eugene Bullard at the Warner Robins Air Force Base down in Macon.
That's great. And your involvement with that.
And I've been asked by Mr. Pat Epps to serve on the committee to garner public knowledge of this effort to create this statue honoring someone who society passed over. And the donations can be sent to Georgia World War I Centennial Commission, P.O. Box 15909, Dahlonega, Georgia 30533. Checks that are donated should be made payable to the UNG, that's Uniform November Golf Foundation, Inc., and the remarks column should have Eugene Bullard statue. That's GWW1CC P.O. Box 1599, Dahlonega, Georgia 30533. This is something that we in Georgia can do to give back, or any other states in the United States, in this period now of dismantling so many Civil War monuments that were dedicated to those who fought in the Civil War. This is something positive we can do to honor someone who, although he wasn't able to serve the United States military, was denied that opportunity, but he showed what an incredible human being he was to be able to, at 12 years old, make his way to France.
Absolutely.
To serve in the French Foreign Legion.
Yeah, and the fact that he was denied is just an even bigger reason to put the statue up and just honor him.
Absolutely. Well, the reason this is so important, and we're trying to get the Tuskegee, I'm a member of the Atlanta chapter of the Tuskegee Airmen, we're trying to get them on board to be able to contribute to this statue, because those who contribute significant amounts, that is $16,000 or more, will have a plaque in their honor installed on the monument.
16,000?
16,000.
You got my checkbook?
I got it in the car.
Okay.
Yeah.
Get right on that.
You guys are something.
That's now you said with the Lafayette in the France. There's a movie that
Flyboys.
I just watched that for the first time probably about a month ago. Is that the same same group?
They've glamorized it,
Well, of
for
course
Hollywood.
they do. Yeah, for Hollywood.
But that is purports to be a depiction of Eugene Bullard with that Flyboy group. I've got to go back and read it again.
Okay.
But the one black actor that's in there,
there is one black guy that's in there, and
is purported to be Eugene Bullard.
really,
Yeah, so I'll have to go
Wow.
back and see what that movie's about. But over 500,000 people a year visit the Warner Robins Museum. And we want the people who are the biggest contributors to the erection of this statue to be acknowledged for their contribution. We're hoping that 100 Black Men of Atlanta will participate. We're hoping that the Tuskegee Airmen chapter, their names should be on that plaque, because I stand on the shoulders of the Tuskegee Airmen Red Tails, but many people don't know that the Tuskegee Airmen stand on the shoulders of Eugene Bullard.
oh, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. That's wow.
Yeah, so
But that would be such an honor to be able to go up there and
well,
honor him.
we have a tight timeline, because the Centennial Commission celebration is intended for Armistice Day of 2018, which will be the centennial of the armistice.
Right.
And they want the statue to be completed and erected by Armistice Day of 2018. So those who would support this project, we would appreciate it, and it is an opportunity to give back. I know we have many human beings that are suffering as a result of the hurricanes that have come through the United States, and not to speak of the islands suffering. And we got plenty of places that our hard-earned dollars can go. But this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to honor someone who would have served his country honorably and courageously had he had the opportunity.
Wow.
Do you have a website for this endeavor that we could send people to?
I don't know about the Georgia World War I Commission. They may have a website, but you can go to my website, www.captainbriansettles.com, and contact me about information
excellent.
leading to their website.
And then we can share that as well on our page when we post in our description, because we like to add links or anything like that so people can have quick access, and we can add that to this show.
Absolutely.
And
So-
your book, your books are also available on the website.
They're on the website. On the home page is A Shattered Dream, a single-parent airline pilot story. It's on the home page, but on a black band on the home page with author bio, photo gallery is a link, other books. And visitors to the website can pull up Shattered Smoke for Breakfast on the website and get paperback copies of Smoke for Breakfast. They're two great reads, and the Lord did bless me with some writing talent, and I guarantee you that anyone that takes the time to read these books will be inspired and amazed at the story.
I'm trying to learn the whole writing thing. The good Lord didn't bless me with a writing talent, but he blessed me with Jason, who helps me. He corrects my writing inabilities. Now, you were with ATA,
Yes,
flying the 7.2 and the 7.5.
Before,
last-
Mark, just before you get to that, I just want, before we move off of this, Stephen found for us the United States World War I Centennial Commission, which is World War I, that's the number 1, centennial.org.
Great.
So there's lots of information there.
That's
We'll have
great.
it on our site.
We'll put that on our site. So World War I with the number 1, centennial.org.
Good deal.
Thanks,
Thank
Stephen.
you. Thank you, guys. Yeah.
So you were a 7.2 and a 7.5 driver.
7.2 co-pilot, then 7.5 co-pilot. Then I spent my last 5 years as a Boeing 757 captain. And I must say parenthetically that I cannot adequately share with listeners, viewers, what it was like flying into LaGuardia Airport 2 days after 9/11
Oh,
of 2001.
wow.
And coming in from the south and looking down at the World Trade Center area and seeing that black hole that was still smoldering
Yep, still.
with black smoke, and thinking that the hijackers had stolen the very same type airplane that I was flying. Luckily, I was off, living in Sarasota, Florida. I was off, but I saw it all on TV. And I knew when the second airplane hit, that it was a terrorist attack, because no pilot who's qualified to fly an airplane that big and complicated, even if he had lost both engines, would have run into a building.
No, they're going to do everything they can to avoid it.
Right, so I knew we were in trouble.
And you were with ATA. Did you ever happen to fly down into Mobile, Alabama, MOB?
No, we had, with private jet, we had lots of gambling junkets to the Biloxi, Mississippi casinos.
Yeah, because we had, I've actually loaded and unloaded several ATA aircraft when I was working the ramp in Mobile.
We had our charter operation of ATA that was called Ambassador, and they ran junkets, gambling junkets all over to Vegas and down to Mississippi.
I loved it when the planes came in just because of the planes. I hated dealing with the luggage and all of that, but I mean, I've loaded, unloaded several of the ATA aircraft, mostly 7.2s. That's what we had down there. But that's pretty cool that you worked for ATA.
Yeah. Most of our flights with ATA, they did go heavily scheduled service about the time that I was hired, but prior to that time, they had mostly been in the charter business, flying military contracts, flying veterans overseas to, combat areas of operation. But I love flying for ATA. That 757 was a dream to fly, and flew mostly to Orlando, San Juan, Los Angeles, and Newark, LaGuardia.
Yep.
And destinations like that. But it was great. I hated for my career to be over. I couldn't believe that 860 arrived so fast. But now that I'm in my 70s, I'm reminded of what George Carlin said before he passed away, that if I had known I was going to make it to 70, I would have taken better care of my body.
Yeah, the 7.5, I've worked on many of those, both on UPS, Northwest.
Oh yeah.
And it's an amazing airplane, very powerful. Always loved working on those. I got a few friends of mine now that used to fly for Northwest that are now flying 7.5s for. They've upgraded to 7.5s from the Mad Dogs.
Right.
And they absolutely love the plane.
Yeah, for the listeners who might not know what the Mad Dog is, that's the MD-87,
Right.
88s, I think, that Delta flies. Yeah. But the 727 was probably more fun to fly than the 757, because the 757 was latest technology automation and was intended to be an all autopilot operation. You take the aircraft off manually, but after you climb through 3,000 or 4,000 feet, autopilot goes on, and you don't kick it off again until you're on short final at the destination airport. Whereas the 727, you could fly that thing up to level off if you wanted to manually, and fly it all the way down if you wanted to, and it didn't really jeopardize the safety of the operation. Because you see, in the 757s, 777, latest vintage aircraft, they're intended to be two pilots. But the pilot not flying is assigned to the radio work. And he also sets up all the switches that the pilot flying tells him to set up. Bug my airspeed to 300. Set my altitude to 190. Bug my heading to 270. The pilot not flying is doing all of this, so that the pilot flying is just concentrating on flying the airplane to where he's supposed to take it. And he's not talking on the radio. But when some pilots get frisky and want to kick off the autopilot on these modern aircraft, we sometimes kiddingly call it abnormal procedure, because now the pilot flying the airplane has to shift his own bug, and set his own airspeed and his own altitude, and the other pilot is still talking on the radio. So it's a little bit higher workload.
Definitely busier.
If you get the comparison, it's a little higher workload when the autopilot is not flying the airplane.
And the 727, I'm convinced, is just as loud on the ground as it is at the flight levels. Those things were so loud. And then when they put the hush kits on them, I'm like, that didn't help. They didn't help. They're still loud.
Absolutely. I sometimes would like to see a decibel comparison, and I'm sure it's available. You talk about loud, the Phantom taking off when it went into afterburner.
They are. I've had the chance to see one fly, and they are super loud.
Yeah,
super loud. But
I love the Phantom. It was so much more stable in formation flying than the T-38, in Air Force pilot training, because the T-38 was sleek and slim, basically an F-5.
super fast.
And it was squirrely in close formation. But the F-4 was really stable, in close formation. And I guess Goose Pimple's even talking about it.
Yeah.
But like I said in my book, though, I said that there's a passage at the beginning of Smoke for Breakfast. There's some Rodin is trying to get me. This book begins, there is a distant place just beyond the invisible mind's eye where disbelief lives. It is the place where the memories of our most extraordinary encounters with life reside. Encounters we cannot revisit because time has moved on and our current minds cannot fathom that we actually lived through our past.
Wow.
Very nice. Thanks for sharing that
That's
with
very
us.
nice. The when you flew the F-4 in Vietnam, did they already have the external gun pods on those?
Yeah, the D models, which I flew, we had C's at Davis Mountain where I went through training, but in Vietnam, we flew the D models at Da Nang, and I was fortunate enough at the end of my tour in Da Nang to spend 2 months flying the E model, which it had the internally
it was built
mounted,
internal at that point.
20 millimeter cannon, but with the D model, we had gun pods that were mounted on the outboard TERS.
Because it was, from what I've read and what I've understood, everything was so dependent upon missile, guidance and all that time, and then they started, dogfighting became more of a necessity, which is why they started adding the external pods on the F-4s and all that.
Well, I'll tell you, air-to-air combat is really the ultimate gladiator encounter, where you're betting your skills that you can shoot somebody else down at 400 or 500 miles an hour before they can maneuver to shoot you down. I actually was thankful that President Johnson shut down bombing of Hanoi and Haiphong when I got there, because it meant our MiG encounters ended during the time that I was there. Because when President Nixon came in order to expedite the conclusion to the war and have some desirable conclusions in the Paris peace talks, he opened up bombing in North Vietnam, and that's when, for the first time in the war, we started seeing multiple B-52s shot down.
Yep.
And so it was an amazing time in the war, and I just want to thank Pat Epps, who owns Epps Aviation, for this opportunity to come before your cameras. And interestingly enough, in Shattered Dream, I used to bring the Ingalls pilots who flew Mr. Ingalls, Bob Ingalls, out, in and out of Epps Aviation. I used to drop them off here at Epps Aviation to go fly their missions. And I thought, when am I going to get back in my career? And looking like a child in a candy shop at these pilots who were flying Bob Ingalls all around, and thinking that here I am locked in this cab, and they're flying all around the world with Bob Ingalls. But so Epps Aviation has a special place in my heart, because I was a cab driver here, dropping other pilots off, and now I'm sitting here before you as a retired Boeing 757 captain with 2 great books to share with audiences.
One last question I have during the war. Did you ever have the opportunity, as you had mentioned earlier, during the strafing runs and the napalm drops and all that, to assist the ground crew, the infantry? Have you ever had a chance, or have you ever been able to meet somebody that maybe because of your flight in saved their life, and then been able to reconnect after that.
Well, I must say, you must have ESPN to sit here and ask me that question, because I tell a story in Smoke for Breakfast about being duty officer at the squadron one day, and we have to be vigilant about security around the squadron. And I saw this young Marine loitering outside the front of the squadron, and I went over to him and I said, "Is somebody helping you? Is it something that you need?" He said, "Well, I just came in from the bush, and I wanted to meet somebody that flew the F-4, because they told me down at the MAC-V terminal, at the passenger terminal, that the F-4 squadrons were at this end of the air base." And I said, "Yeah, this is the F-4 squadron right here." And he hugged me and said, "I'm here today because you guys from the 390th Attack Fighter Squadron saved my unit just 5 days ago, and I just wanted to come and thank you." And I said, "Man," I said, "I appreciate it." And I said, "Get in the van. I'm going to take you out to the flight line." And I took this young 19-year-old Marine out there, and I let him climb up the ladder of the F-4 and look in that cockpit and see what our office environment looks like. And that Marine never forgot that, I'm sure. We gave each other a big hug, and that was the one consolation that I had for being in Vietnam. I had my reservations about the war, but I knew there were lots of people that were there against their will because they had been drafted, that wanted to return home safely to their family and friends.
And that's
I
what
was
you were
thankful
doing.
that I was able to participate in somebody going home alive.
That's awesome.
And the Tuskegee Airmen, in honor of this weekend, had several of the same experiences from the 17 pilots, from what I've understood and read about.
Yeah.
That they would be, on base overseas, and these 17 pilots would come up saying, "Hey, we're trying to find out who this squadron is," not knowing it was them, and they're like, "It was us." And of course, they still were resistant about it at that point.
Yes.
But ultimately got to the point to where the Tuskegee Squadron, and from what I've read and understood, actually became very highly requested, and that some 17 bomber squadrons would almost refuse to fly unless the Tuskegee Airmen were escorting them.
Well, I tell you, one reason why I'm so moved as a next generation, combat pilot who stands, as I said earlier, on the shoulders of the Tuskegee Airmen, is that they came back to an America that didn't appreciate their contribution. But it's great that here in 2017, we're having air shows dedicated to the Tuskegee Airmen, and it seems like that America is trying to say thank you for what they went through.
America is finally saying, "You know what, we were stupid, and now let's honor you."
Absolutely, and for as long as we have them still here, there are many of them, documented original Tuskegee Airmen are in their mid-90s, and we're losing them, every month. And so our opportunities to parade them in front of the public are going to disappear here before too long. So it's great that the Commemorative Air Force, has taken it on to be able to acknowledge them and have this great air show out here today.
Oh, you should have seen me earlier when we had 3 of them out here. I was just like,
Mark was just like a little boy.
I was, and I've always loved the squadron. I have a son who's 12, and probably knows more about World War II aviation history than probably a lot of historians.
Right.
And the Tuskegee Airmen are his favorite squadron.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, he disowned me because I couldn't bring him this weekend because he's in school down in Mobile, but he absolutely loves the squadron.
Well, like Eugene Bullard, his life story, I'm just so in awe. I mean, it was hard enough to get through Air Force pilot training with everybody pulling for you.
Oh, yeah.
Right, with everybody pulling for you, and all you had to deal with the challenges of the academics and the flying schedules. And I must say that my year at Air Force pilot training was one of the most challenging years of my life. I finished in the middle of my class, but I didn't have people betting on my failure or wishing that I was going to be.
Or even almost trying to set you up for failure.
Sabotage the failure, right. But for the Tuskegee Airmen to accomplish what they did under that kind of lack of support, for their achievement is an extraordinary thing. that it's immeasurable how much that contributed to the advancement of the civil rights of African Americans in this country.
Oh, absolutely.
As a result of what they achieved.
And they, for a while, they were the only squadron that did not even lose any bombers. I believe toward the end of the war, they had lost some, but they are probably the squadron that has lost the least amount of bombers.
Yeah, they did lose some. I'm not familiar with the statistics, but they did lose some. But I know that they distinguished themselves to the extent that the American bomber pilots were always thrilled to look out on their wingtip and see the red tails out there. Yeah.
That's
and that was their mission. No matter what the cost, your job is to protect the bombers.
Yeah.
And these other fighter squadrons, the white fighter pilots, if you will, they're going out there and they see a Jerry come through, they're gonna break out of the escort to go chase them because they're going for the ace.
Right.
They want to be the ace pilot, whereas the Tuskegee Airmen did their job.
Had the discipline to stay in formation.
They stood there as hard as it was.
Right.
They stood there and protected these bombers, and I've always had the utmost respect for these guys, and it's been an honor for us, and especially for me, being a pilot and just loving the story about it, to actually meet with these guys today.
Yes.
And to talk with them.
Yes.
And of course, I had to get a picture, so I got to get a picture with you as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And to be able to have that in my memory and share it with my son, and then to carry on that legacy is the best that I can.
Yeah, well, I've been busy this afternoon sharing my books with the public, and I'm really looking forward to the dinner tonight. I'm Pat Epps' invited guest to be there to be able to finally meet a lot of these documented original Tuskegee Airmen myself, some of whom I have met before when I was chair of the aviation department at Delaware State University for a couple of years. I think I met Colonel McGee.
I've been trying to get him over here, but everything's just so crazy.
Yeah, so it's great. And I thank you guys again for the opportunity to share a little bit of my story. I do encourage your listeners, Eugene Bullard, Georgia World War I Centennial Commission. Please send in your donations. You've got the mailbox to send it to. We need to get this statue up. Even though Eugene is long passed away, we can do this to honor
his
a
legacy
man
isn't, though.
That is a true hero.
Very nice. Well, thank you for the surprise visit, Captain Settles. We certainly appreciate hearing from you. And,
Absolutely. It's been great.
It's a great honor, and thank you for sharing your stories and reading a little passage out of your book. And what you're doing is incredible work. So thank you. Thank you for, as we're all fathers of sons, and the fact that you're mentoring young men in that way is really special.
Absolutely. Well, this is my chance to give back, because it was mentors that took me aside and made the difference in my life. Not having a father in my home, and I'm moved to tears at all the examples of our young men who are failing today, but there are many other stories to be told of those who are achieving. And anyone that wants to be the best that they can be in their lives and use their talents and gifts to live a life that God wants them to live, then that's what I'm for promoting these days.
Amazing. Well, thanks again. We certainly appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you for the opportunity.
We will share your website and all the resources that we've talked about on our Facebook page and on our social media.
Thank you very much, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for
and
being
God bless you. Yeah.
And to our viewers, we thank you for tuning in again to Flightcast Live at PDK here at Warbird Weekend. We hope you've been enjoying it. We have one more interview to go, unless we have another surprise coming up from the crew. But we'll be talking back probably here in about
an hour and a half.
Hour and 10 minutes. We're going to be talking with Dana Blows, who's a glider, World War II glider specialist, and he has lots of cool stories to tell. So this episode's been brought to you by Flying Development Studio, makers of the mobile flight simulator Infinite Flight. As always, we thank you for tuning in at Warbird Weekend, and we will be back soon. Happy landings.
Cool.